The alien officer laughed when the scanner confirmed it. Small mass, fragile bone density, no natural weapons. The translator identified the species instantly. Human. The age estimate followed a second later, and for a brief moment, the command deck stayed quiet not because they were afraid, but because they were confused. A child, a human child. One of the raiders even joked that the universe had finally given them something easy. No one noticed how the station's long-range sensors had already begun to spike. No one paid attention to the automated emergency channel that had activated without permission, and no one, absolutely no one, understood what they had just done because across human space, a silent protocol older than most interstellar governments had awakened. A protocol that didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations, and never accepted apologies. Somewhere far away, a human commander stared at a single image on a screen, a scared child in an alien containment pod. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten, he simply said, very calmly, "Find them." And that was the moment the galaxy's countdown began. If stories like this pull you in and refuse to let go, you're already in the right place. Go ahead and like the video so more people can find it. Subscribe for more HFY Sci-Fi stories like this. And drop a comment telling me what you think happens when humans stop asking and start coming. The raid was supposed to be routine. The alien vessel drifted along the outer edge of a trade corridor that barely qualified as civilized space. A place where independent freighters passed through with minimal escorts and even less oversight. The crew had done this dozens of times. Before disable engines, board, grab valuables, leave survivors if convenient. Humans were still relatively new to this region, scattered across frontier systems. Politically divided, militarily inconsistent, most species believed humans survived not through strength, but through luck and numbers. The belief made them careless. The freighter's distress signal had been weak, almost polite, and the raiders boarded expecting resistance that never came. Inside, they found overturned cargo containers, scattered personal effects, and signs of a rushed evacuation. It wasn't until one of the junior officers followed a faint noise down a side corridor that the mistake was made. The sound wasn't mechanical. It wasn't an alarm. It was a soft, uneven breathing, paired with a quiet whimper, that froze him in place. In a storage alcove meant for emergency supplies sat a small human child, knees pulled to their chest, eyes wide with fear, but strangely focused. The officer hesitated not out of compassion, but uncertainty. This wasn't cargo. This wasn't a threat. This was inconvenient. Orders came quickly after that. Secure the specimen. The word specimen made it easier. The child didn't fight. When lifted, didn't scream. When placed inside a containment pod normally reserved for volatile wildlife, they simply stared, memorizing faces, sounds, movements. When the senior raiders joked that humans trained their young to stay quiet in captivity, another suggested the child might be valuable to collectors or research guilds. No one asked the obvious question, why was a human child here alone? As the ship disengaged and jumped to faster than light, the freighter's final automated transmission finished broadcasting. It wasn't a distress call anymore. It was an emergency escalation, packet compressed data, biometric identifiers, location fragments, and a single classification code burned into the signal. The code didn't translate into any known alien language, but in human systems, it meant only one thing. Lost child, and once sent, it could never be recalled. The raiders celebrated their clean escape, unaware that every second carried them closer to something no pirate legend had ever truly captured. The child sat silently inside the pod, pressing one small hand against the transparent barrier, unaware of star systems or empires but completely certain of one thing. Someone would come, and when they did, everything would change. The containment chamber was designed to intimidate. Its transparent walls were reinforced with layered energy fields, humming softly with power, meant to remind anything inside that escape was impossible and resistance pointless. For most captured creatures, the effect was immediate panic, frantic movement, eventual exhaustion. The human child did none of those things. They sat quietly on the smooth floor, legs folded awkwardly, small fingers tracing patterns in the faint condensation forming on the inside of the barrier. Their breathing slowed after the first few minutes, not because fear had vanished, but because something deeper had taken over, a learned instinct. Stay still, stay quiet, observe. The aliens noticed this, though they didn't understand it. From the control deck, several crew members watched the live feed with mild curiosity. One commented that the human young seemed defective, lacking the expected emotional responses. Another suggested sedation, but the medical scans showed elevated stress hormones balanced by an unusual neural regulation pattern. The ship's medical AI flagged it as adaptive behavior, a term most of the crew ignored. To them, adaptability was a trait of predators, not prey, and certainly not of children. Time passed differently for the child than it did for the crew. For the raiders, the jump through hyperspace was routine. filled with chatter, planning, and crude jokes about profits and promotions. For the child, every vibration of the hull, every unfamiliar sound, every flicker of alien light was catalogued and remembered. When one of the crew members finally entered the chamber to observe up close, the child looked up, not pleading, not crying, but studying. Alien paused, unsettled by the intensity of that gaze. It wasn't hatred, it wasn't fear, it was recognition, as if the child understood that this moment mattered. The alien attempted communication through the universal translator, asking simple questions: name, origin, value. The child didn't respond at first. Then, in a small, steady voice, they asked a question of their own: where are you taking me? The translator struggled with the tone, flagging it as calm but emotionally charged. The alien scoffed and answered vaguely, dismissively, but something about the exchange lingered. The child nodded once, as if confirming a suspicion, and fell silent again. What none of the crew realized was that the child's personal locator, damaged but not destroyed, had completed its final handshake before the jump. It didn't transmit words or images, only confirmation. Identity verified. Status, alive. Location, unknown. For human systems, that was enough. Across multiple fleets, across political boundaries and corporate rivalries, systems began to reassign priorities without debate. Ships changed course. Exercises were canceled. Classified channels lit up with activity that would never be recorded. In public archives back on the alien vessel, unease began to spread in subtle ways. Minor system glitches appeared: navigation, recalibrations that took too long, sensor echoes that didn't match expected readings. One officer suggested it was interference from uncharted space. Another blamed human technology, laughing it off as superstition. Yet a few of the older crew members grew quiet, recalling half-forgotten warnings from military briefings and black market rumors. Humans, they said, were not dangerous because of their weapons. They were dangerous because of what they protect, how far they would go when that protection failed. The child eventually lay down inside the pod, eyes closing, not in surrender, but trust. Somewhere, someone would notice they were gone. Someone always did. And while the alien ship cut through hyperspace toward its destination, a destination it believed safe, the child slept beneath artificial stars, soon aware that entire sectors of the galaxy had already begun to shift, aligning themselves around a single, unstoppable purpose. The first human response did not come in the form the galaxy expected. There was no public declaration, no furious broadcast flooding open channels, no dramatic demand echoing through diplomatic networks. Instead, it began with kind of silence that only humans ever seem to use properly, deep within human space. Automated systems parsed the fragmented data packet that had slipped through before the freighter's destruction. The identity confirmation alone triggered a cascade of locked protocols, some civilian, some military, some that technically did not exist. Within minutes, encrypted notifications reached command nodes across multiple jurisdictions, each carrying the same classification tag and the same priority override. Lost child, verified. In a quiet operations center, orbiting a blue-white star. A human officer stared at the display as the information stabilized. The child's name appeared. Age, genetic markers, last known guardian authorization. He didn't ask why a civilian child had been aboard a frontier freighter, and he didn't question whether this situation fell under his chain of command. None of that mattered anymore. He pressed a single control, and the room shifted from routine readiness to something far more deliberate. Not panic, not rage. Preparation. The kind that came from a species that had learned, through centuries of loss, exactly what not to say when it was time to act. Across interstellar space, the first sign that something was wrong appeared in the communications relays used by neutral systems. Human traffic increased, not chaotic, not disorganized, but dense and purposeful. Fleets didn't mobilize in the traditional sense. Instead, vessels already in motion altered their by fractions of a degree. Subtle changes that meant nothing to casual observers, but everything to those who understood vector convergence. Supply ships rerouted, deep-range scouts went dark, slipping into a mission silence. Even human civilian networks began to exhibit strange behavior. Data flowing inward instead of outward, as if the entire species had taken a collective breath. The alien raiders felt none of this directly, but the galaxy around them did. Independent stations started delaying docking permissions for no stated reason. A trade hub they planned to visit abruptly shut down its gates, citing technical anomaly. A mercenary contact went offline mid-negotiation, leaving behind only a cryptic warning: you should let that one go. When the crew laughed it off, the warning was forgotten except by the navigator, who quietly began recalculating jump options that avoided human-influenced space entirely. Then came the message. It didn't arrive through standard diplomatic channels, and it didn't carry official insignia. It was short, unadorned, and terrifying in its restraint. The universal translator struggled at first, not with the words, but with the intent behind them. "We are aware you have our child. This is not a negotiation. You will return them unharmed. You have until we arrive." No threats followed, no countdown timer. Just a set of coordinates embedded so precisely that even the most advanced alien systems recognized them as a promise rather than a guess. The bridge fell silent as the message replayed. Someone laughed nervously and called it a bluff. Someone else demanded to know how the humans had found them so quickly. The captain said, "Nothing," eyes fixed on the coordinates, recognizing a level of tracking sophistication that far exceeded anything publicly attributed to humanity. Outside the ship, the stars looked the same as they always had, but the navigator swore quietly, desperately, that one of them had shifted position. Back in the containment chamber, the child stirred, as if responding to something unseen. They sat up, pressing their hand once more against the barrier, a faint smile touching their lips for just a moment. They didn't know where they were or how far they'd traveled, but they felt it all the same. The change in the universe's direction, the subtle pull of home, growing stronger. The galaxy had heard the signal, and now, whether it wanted to or not, it was going to watch what happened next.
The first governments to react did so quietly, and that alone was enough to unsettle the rest of the galaxy. When species that normally demanded transparency and procedures suddenly closed their channels and deferred decisions, others took notice. Human diplomatic envoys withdrew from negotiations mid-sentence, offering no explanations. Only polite acknowledgments and promises to resume discussions at a later date. Trade agreements were temporarily suspended. Joint military exercises were postponed indefinitely. To outsiders, it looked like political chaos. To anyone who understood humans even slightly, it looked like focus. Archive data began circulating and restricted networks, historical incidents rarely discussed. Outside military academies and emergency councils, records of human responses to civilian harm, refugee massacres, lost colonies. Each case followed a pattern disturbingly similar to the present situation. The humans had never announced retaliation. They had never asked for permission. They had simply arrived, solved the problem in the most permanent way available, and then returned to pretending they were reasonable neighbors. The difference this time was scale. Those past incidents involved dozens, sometimes hundreds of lives. This involved one, a child, and that distinction terrified even the most hardened strategists. On a neutral observation station far from the raider's path, a multi-species council convened an emergency session. The agenda was never officially logged, but everyone present understood the question hanging in the air. What happens when humans decide they are past the point of restraint? Analysts debated in low voices, replaying simulations that ended in cascading failures and impossible casualty figures. One elder delegate, whose species measured history in millennia, spoke only once. "When humans say they are coming," he said, "they already are." Meanwhile, the alien raiders began to feel the consequences of being noticed. Hyperspace routes that had always been stable grew unreliable, forcing recalculations that burned. Precious time. Navigation buoys stopped responding. Automated traffic control systems refused to authenticate their transponder codes, labeling them unverified and restricted without explanation. It was as if the galaxy itself had decided to slow them down, gently but relentlessly, guiding them toward an inevitable meeting they could no longer avoid. Aboard the ship, paranoia took root. Crew members argued over whether to abandon the child, whether releasing them into an escape pod might count as compliance. The captain rejected both ideas. There was no guarantee the humans would believe them, and worse, no guarantee the humans would stop. The message had been clear: return the child unharmed. Anything else was gambling with extinction-level attention. Yet holding on to the child felt just as dangerous, like carrying an unstable star inside their hull. In the containment chamber, the child remained calm, though the hum of the ship had changed. Vibrations felt sharper now, more frequent. As emergency systems compensated for anomalies the crew refused to acknowledge, the child watched the door more often, listening to Ray's voices through the walls. At one point, they spoke softly. Not to anyone in particular. "They're close, aren't they?" The monitoring AI flagged the statement as an emotional coping mechanism. It did not flag the accuracy far beyond the radar's sensors. Something vast and human slipped into alignment with the coordinates it had been given. It did not broadcast its presence. It did not request passage. It moved with the quiet certainty of a species that had already decided the outcome. History, which had been holding its breath, began to whisper again, reminding the galaxy of a lesson it never seemed to remember for long. When humans came for their own, being too late was never an excuse. By the time the alien raiders realized negotiation was no longer an option, the universe around them had already made its decision. The deadline the humans had set was never meant to be bargained. Well, it wasn't even meant to be discussed. It was a marker in time, a courtesy extended only because humans still hoped the situation could end without further damage. When that moment passed, something subtle but irreversible changed. Communications across the sector began failing in a very specific way. Not chaotic, not broken, but deliberately filtered. Messages sent outward returned unchanged, as if no one was listening anymore. Messages sent inward were simply never acknowledged. The raiders were no longer part of the conversation. On the bridge, tension reached a breaking point. Crew members argued openly now, fear overpowering discipline. Some demanded the child be released immediately, insisting they could still send proof of compliance. Others believed the humans were bluffing, that no single child, no matter the species, could justify the mobilization they were imagining. The captain, staring at the tactical display, knew both sides were wrong. Releasing the child now would not stop what was coming, and keeping the child ensured they would be remembered not as criminals, but as an example. His hands trembled as he ordered the ship to change course again, chasing escape routes that no longer truly existed. Meanwhile, the child felt the shift long before any alarm sounded. The ship's hum had changed pitch, deeper now, strained. The lights flickered as power was rerouted, and for the first time since their capture, the containment field pulsed unevenly. The child pressed both palms against the barrier, eyes wide not with fear, but with concern. "You're scared," they said softly when an alien guard approached to check the pod. The translator hesitated before delivering the words, uncertain how to classify them. The guard recoiled, unsettled by the accuracy. The child tilted their head slightly and added, almost kindly, "My people don't stop once they start." That statement spread through the ship faster than any alarm. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't defiance. It was certainty. Veterans among the crew went pale, recalling old stories whispered in dockyards and outlaw port, stories of human fleets that arrived without warning, struck without hesitation, and vanished without celebration. Stories where surrender came too late, not because humans were cruel, but because timing mattered and mercy had limits. One officer muttered the words everyone was thinking but no one wanted to hear. "They're not coming to punish us. They're coming to take the child back, far away." The human forces continued their advance in total silence. No jamming, no electronic warfare broadcasts, no psychological operations, just presence. Space itself seemed to grow heavier around the raiders' vessel as unknown masses entered nearby systems. Their gravity signatures barely detectable but unmistakably deliberate. Human commanders reviewed projections with cold efficiency, not discussing victory or loss, but recovery time and collateral containment. The child's biometric feed remained stable, alive. That was all that mattered as the alien ship hurtled onward, engines pushed beyond safe limits. The captain finally understood the truth that would define his final moments. This had never been about power or territory. It wasn't even about revenge. Humans did not wage wars over pride, they waged them over responsibility. And by taking a human child, the raiders had placed themselves between a species and something it considered sacred. The galaxy had seen human anger before. What it was about to witness was human resolve, and that, as history would soon remind everyone, was far more terrifying. The first sign of the humans' arrival was not visual. It was mathematical. Navigation systems aboard the Raider's ship began returning impossible readings, minor discrepancies at first. Fractions of a decimal that suggested mass where none should exist. The ship's AI attempted to compensate, recalculating trajectories and issuing quiet correction burns that only worsened the problem. Space ahead felt wrong, dense in a way vacuum should never be. The captain ordered a full sensor sweep, and that was when the alarms finally screamed, not because something had appeared, but because something had finished arriving. It hung just beyond visual range at first, deliberately masking its emissions. Its gravitational signature folded inward with precision that defied known physics. Then, slowly, it allowed itself to be seen. The human warship did not tear its way out of hyperspace with fireworks or thunder. It unfolded into reality like a thought made solid, vast, and impossibly still. Hull plating absorbed starlight instead of reflecting it, broken only by thin lines of cold blue illumination tracing the ship's structure like veins. Compared to the Raider's vessel, it was not merely larger, it existed on a different conceptual scale. A construct built with the assumption that it would never need to run. No weapons powered up. No targeting locks were broadcast. The human ship simply stayed there, positioned with perfect geometry relative to the Raider's vector, close enough that escape calculations collapsed into futility. The crew froze, staring at the tactical display as their systems auto-labeled the contact using fragmented intelligence databases. Human military asset, classification, unknown, threat level, incalculable. Someone whispered that it looked unfinished, like a prototype. The navigator shook his head slowly. No, he said, it looks restrained. A transmission followed, not a demand, not an ultimatum, but a presence. The human signal slid into the Raider's communications systems without resistance, bypassing encryption as if it had been invited. A single human officer appeared on the main display, seated, composed, eyes steady. There was no anger in his expression, no urgency. You have our child, he said calmly. We are here to retrieve them. He paused, just long enough for the weight of those words to settle. You will power down your weapons and open a corridor. Any deviation will be interpreted as a delay. On the containment deck, the child felt it instantly. The vibration through the floor changed, stabilizing, as if the ship itself had stopped trembling. They looked up at the ceiling, a small breath escaping their lips that sounded almost like relief. The guard station nearby backed away from the pod, suddenly unwilling to be close to the barrier that separated the child from their people. For the first time since the capture, the child smiled openly. Not because they were safe yet, but because they knew they would be. The captain's hands hovered uselessly over the controls. Every instinct screamed to comply, yet fear rooted him in place. He had spent his life believing survival meant staying unpredictable, staying mobile. The human ship contradicted the philosophy entirely. It didn't chase, it didn't threaten. It waited, secure in the knowledge that time now belonged to it, finally. With a voice that barely held together, the captain gave the order to stand down. Power levels dropped. Weapons went dark. The ship felt suddenly naked. As docking protocols initialized, overridden by human systems with surgical ease, the galaxy held its breath. Observers across nearby systems recorded the event in silence, understanding they were witnessing something that would be studied for generations. This was not a battle. This was a correction. And as the human vessel extended its boarding corridor, smooth and inevitable, one truth became impossible to deny. The humans had arrived not late, not early, but exactly when they intended to, and from this moment forward, nothing about the galaxy's understanding of them would ever be the same. The docking corridor sealed with a sound that carried through the Raider's ship, like a closing verdict. No breach alarm screamed. No explosive decompression followed. Instead, atmosphere equalized perfectly, smoother than any civilian transfer the crew had ever experienced. The human boarding team did not rush. They advanced at a measured pace, boots striking the deck in synchronized cadence. Armor matte black and unmarked except for a single symbol on each chest plate. A simple outline of Earth. No visible weapons were raised. Yet every sensor on the Raiders' ship registered controlled energy fields humming just beneath the armor surface, ready to become lethal at a thought. The captain met them halfway down the main corridor, flanked by guards who could barely keep their hands from shaking. The human officer from the transmission stepped forward, helmet retracting to reveal the same calm face from the screen. Up close, the absence of rage was more terrifying than any snarl could have been. "Take us to the child," he said, voice level, final. The captain swallowed and gestured, his authority reduced to a formality he no longer believed in. As they moved, every crew member they passed pressed themselves flat against the walls, instinctively minimizing their presence, as if predators were known to punish unnecessary movement. On the containment deck, the pod light shifted as human access codes no one else should have possessed slid into place. The barrier dissolved soundlessly. The child stepped forward before anyone could stop them. Small hands reaching out, the human officer knelt immediately, abandoning any pretense of command hierarchy, and the moment the child was in his arms, something fundamental changed. The ship's systems registered a massive power surge from the human warship outside, not aggressive, not defensive, but stabilizing, as if the retrieval of the child had completed a circuit the universe itself had been waiting on. The officer stood, turning slowly to face the Raiders' captain. "This incident will be logged," he said, not unkindly. "You will be detained and transferred to a neutral tribunal. Your species will not be punished for your actions today." A pause. "But you will be remembered." That was worse than any execution sentence. Reputation, the humans had learned, was a weapon that outlived wars. As the humans withdrew, escorting the child back through the corridor, the Raiders' ship felt emptier than it ever had before, stripped not just of a captive, but of an illusion. Across nearby systems, transmissions exploded. Analysis, speculation, panic. The phrase spread faster than any official report. They took a human child, and just as quickly, another followed it, whispered in fear and awe like, "Never again." From the observation deck of the human warship, the child looked out at the stars, safe, wrapped in a familiar blanket that smelled like home. "Are they going to be okay?" the child asked quietly. The officer smiled faintly. "They'll survive," he said, "and they'll learn." The warship pivoted, space-time bending obediently around its mass, and vanished without spectacle, leaving behind a galaxy forever altered by a single mistake. Because the truth was now undeniable, etched into collective memory with surgical clarity. Humans did not conquer for territory, did not dominate for pride, and did not arrive screaming for blood. But if you crossed the one line, they never left and guarded if you dared to steal. What they loved in the universe itself would make room for their response.